Hey, Wave Riders. Thank you for joining me on a brand new episode of the Clear to Send podcast. I'm your host, Roel Dionisio. It's just going to be me today. And for those of you who are listening, I do have a video component where I'm going to be going into behind the scenes of a predictive design that I'm going to do for an office floor plan. And so we'll take a floor plan, import it into design software, and then kind of go through my mind and let me think out loud about what I'm considering. What are the different things that I need to consider in a floor plan, the kind of questions I'd ask a client. But before we get into the meat of that, I do want to thank Meter for sponsoring this episode. Meter does deliver a complete network stack from wire to wireless, and they also include cellular. They all have that into a cloud managed solution built for performance and scale. Check it out. Head over to meter.com/clear to send to book a demo. So thank you to Meter for sponsoring this episode. And what I want to do, let's get into like the sharing of my screen because I want to take Hamina and build an office design here. And what I'm really needing to do with a client is to take their requirements, what they want to achieve, and to put that into a design with a bill of materials and output that they know on what to spend and what to install. And so the first thing we have to do is get an accurate floor plan. And so I already have one in mind. So I'm going to use that. I will just drag that into Hamina and it'll import it. And what's important about the floor plan is it needs to be accurate, an accurate representation of the office. So something that is to scale, maybe created with a CAD application, either in PDF format, CAD file, an image, but it should be to scale. You don't want something created by hand or created in Excel with a bunch of blocks. Uh, you want something that is legitimate. And so here I have an office floor plan. The first thing that I want to do is set the scale. Setting the scale is going to be very important in terms of the accuracy of the design. And so I'll take this and usually you get this from the CAD file, or maybe somebody has gone on site and also gathered that measurement for you. I typically like to pick a pretty long wall rather than a very short distance for the accuracy of this design. All right, so there we go. I will hit save. Now, the next thing that you would want to do here is to set the area that is in scope, or you can draw the walls. So, why don't we do the scope zones? When I click on the left scope zones, Hamina does a very good job at telling me here's the auto scope that it found. And this is a very good representation of what is in scope. I'm just going to accept that. But let's say now there's an area that's out of scope. So when I talk to the client, I like to ask them, where do you need Wi Fi coverage? And where are the areas you do not need Wi Fi coverage? Especially when you're dealing with a floor plan where there's other tenants involved. And or there's just other areas where there's no Wi-Fi required. Maybe they uh, cannot have Wi-Fi there, and so we can go into the design software and let's say this small corner down here is not their space. And so I'll click and draw out the area that is out of scope. And then I'll right click and I'll have the option for selecting this as an in scope zone or an out of scope zone. It's out of scope and you can see that it is turned gray. So comparing it to this out of scope zone, you see it's grayed out versus this part of the zone, it's colored in, it's white. And now that we have that area, the next thing that I do is draw in the walls. And usually this would take a pretty decent amount of time to go through and draw out the walls. What's great is Hamina just quickly draws that for me. That's how fast it was. It auto drew the walls. You can see on the right side, it's saying, hey, I found a drywall heavy, and also the doors are wooden, and it's setting it to 5 dBm of attenuation. It did a very decent job at drawing these walls for me. So I'll accept it, but I will modify it. So if I take the drywall, or actually the door, the wooden door, I can see over here in this conference room that it did not draw in that door. So I'll click and draw in the door there. That's just an example of using the tool to automatically make you productive. Very, very, very productive here, not having to waste time drawing walls. I know some people love drawing walls because it's kind of soothing for them. But for me, I'd rather just get that done quickly. One thing to note with the floor plan is knowing what is actually on the floor plan. I see a lot of rectangles and squares. Could those be pillars, for example? These squares right here, this square, this could be a wall, for example. I don't know. These are questions that we need to ask the end user. And so on the left, I can add a note and I can click onto a specific area and say, is this a wall? And I can change the icon to a question mark. And we can look at that later with the client. And maybe I'll mark it a little bit more reddish. That's just as a reminder for me to ask the end user or the client. But these, let's say they're pillars, these squares. Now, instead of drawing walls, I can draw an attenuation object. And knowing, having maybe walked through the site or have spoken to somebody, maybe the architect, and they say these are pillars, we can go in and maybe, if I'm looking for attenuation objects, let's just say it's a drywall heavy. I'll go into, zoom in into this square here, and I'll draw that in. So I'm drawing a wall, not an attenuation area. So I'm going to hit Command Z and I'm going to go back. I selected walls. I really got to go into attenuation objects. And you can tell there isn't like a drywall type of pillar, but I can click on this button up here in the top right and create my own custom attenuation object. And let's just call it pillar. And let's say it goes up about 20 feet. And then let's say the attenuation is 5 dBm per meter. And I will give it this really gray color. And then now that I have that object selected, I can draw it out around this square. And now I've got that attenuation object. All right. You can select it. You can move it around if you need to. But let's say you need to put a bunch of those everywhere because that will affect your accuracy of your predictive if there is a pillar there. But of course, you want to take a measurement of what that could look like. So now I've got walls, I've got scale, I've got attenuation objects. I found up here at the top right that Hamina drew in walls around the elevators. I know this is an elevator bank, so I will go back to attenuating objects and select elevator and actually draw those in. And I'll leave one elevator undrawn just to show you why the accuracy matters. And let's just assume, let's pretend that the CEO's office is right behind here. Instead of a one large office, he's got this long office as an example. Okay. And speaking of like CEO, right? Um, a lot of times when the customer shows me the floor plan, I will actually start asking them questions like who are these people, what kind of group is sitting here in these sets of cubicles, who are going to be in these offices, do you have some VIPs, is there a C-suite hallway that I should be aware of, because I will absolutely ensure that Wi-Fi is going to be very good in that spot. And also, we want to do this to capacity purposes, right? If you've got a large area of cubicles, you want to be sure that Wi-Fi can support all of those devices and the applications that they're going to use in that space. So if we go back to the design here, I've left that elevator bank. We've got the walls. We got an exclusion area, an area that we're not going to care about. We've driven some attenuation objects, and then now we've spoken to the end user about what's going to be happening in this space. And usually for me, it's understanding Wi-Fi usage, the type of applications they're going to use. Are they salespeople making a bunch of calls over the internet, over Wi-Fi? Are they developers? Are they primarily downloading a bunch of databases from AWS, or maybe they're downloading a bunch of libraries from GitHub? I don't know. And so I ask a lot of questions about how Wi-Fi will be used, especially in what areas, that will help dictate to me what kind of access point I'm going to use, maybe a specific antenna that I want to leverage. But in this case, we're just going to say this is a simple office space, right? Um, and and here we're going to select an AP now. Let's say we've got all those questions answered. Oh, but one thing that is also important is talking to maybe the architect or the building manager. Are there going to be any kind of restrictions on installation? Are there going to be special installations of a ceiling? Like maybe there's a fancy ceiling made out of metal and it's going to be suspended from the open office space. These are really good details to know, especially when you've got uh, a very, I don't want to say crazy, but a creative design for an office space. Maybe they've got these metal beads that are going across this hallway, and I don't know. You just never know with some of these designs. So I like looking at renderings whenever it's a brand new space. But if it's an upgrade, I've typically gone on site, looked around, got an idea for what people are doing. I'll even ask questions to certain people to understand what kind of challenges they're running into. So when we do a new design, we're going to accommodate that issue and resolve it with the new design as well, even if that means reconfiguring something. So a lot of planning up front leading up to the predictive design, lots of questions. And usually you'll have a questionnaire. I'll have a questionnaire. What are we trying to meet? A lot of times I'll talk to the existing IT. Sometimes they'll say, "Hey, we have a requirement of -50 signal strength everywhere," and -50 everywhere would mean either a lot of APs or ratcheting up the transmit power, and so it becomes more of an education, something to educate the IT people of what they're actually trying to achieve. What's the challenge or business requirement that you want to meet? So once we gather all those details, that's what will feed into this design. And now that we've set the scale, that's a requirement. We've set the uh, in scope areas. We've got the walls drawn out, any attenuation objects. Um, Now we can start selecting an AP, right? And so now this is actually a good time to, let's see, go to AP. So on the left, we'll select access points. And on the right pane, we're going to see, maybe if I show my screen, it would help. On the right pane, we're going to select, make sure we select Wi-Fi technology because we are making a Wi-Fi design. If you're doing cellular, private LTE, Zigbee, BLE, you would pick that technology. And then you go down to the access point and pick the access point. I'm going to select Meter because they are sponsoring this episode. So I want to thank Meter for those fine folks over at Meter supporting the show. They're a company that has great people there. They're very smart, so they're building a cloud managed network stack that you have still have full control over, but still be able or now be able to get increased visibility. One thing that you should check out is their Meter command, which is a step above AI, and it allows you to use a natural language and tell Meter, hey, I want a dashboard that shows me the bandwidth graphs for this site, and it'll actually build it for you right then and there. You build a dashboard. No need to have extra servers to try to build that for you. And so you can even get your ISP through Meter if you're trying to search for an ISP for a new office. So I highly recommend you take a look at Meter. Go and book a demo by going to meter.com/clear to send. That's meter.com/clear to book a demo. So thank you to Meter. And what I'll do is I'll use one of their APs to do this design. I'll select the MW08. That's just an AP that I have here in my office. I have one that I'm going to test out. If I hover over the AP, I can see what that signal propagation looks like, both the horizontal and the vertical beam width. Also shows me what its gain is based on their data sheet. So I'll select that. And let's say this big room here in the middle is a conference room. It's a boardroom, looks like it. There's a lot of seats, right? How many board members do they have? They've got, I don't know, 12? Let's just say this is important. Oh, and you know, I didn't even notice there was a scale right there. It says that's 8 feet in distance. So we're talking, is that 8 feet for half of that? Okay. And that's 3 feet. Okay. So we'll place an AP here in the middle. And so that's showing us our primary signal strength. Now, by default, I'll select the AP and then head over to this right pane here. Let me hide myself so you can see the details. It's setting it at a 10 dBm by default here. I'm going to change that to 8 because I'm going to design this to capacity and I want to be able to place access points to try to influence a device to roam to the closer access point, the one with the stronger signal strength. So I'm going to start off at 8 dBm. That's just kind of what I'm thinking, my logic. I do use 10 dBm, but I don't go higher than, say, 15 dBm because I try to match the transmit power of even the end user devices themselves. And so here you can see on the bottom left is showing us Wi-Fi interference on the coverage heat map. I'm going to select coverage and primary. So this is what our primary signal strength looks like in this office space coming from this one access point. Now the colors are very strong. So I'm going to click on this legend down here over global settings and lower down the opacity. And so now we've got that one AP there. And remember this, let's say the user said the CEO's office is up here behind the elevators. So I can put an AP there. And because I added the elevator attenuation object, you can see how the coverage attenuates because of where the AP is, the angle of which that signal is propagating from that AP. And it really attenuates as it hits that elevator. Because I don't have that attenuation object in this middle elevator here, the signal doesn't know that there's an elevator there. The AP doesn't know that. So it just propagates on through. So if I select that AP, you can see the signal strength going through the elevator and into the lobby. And that's why the accuracy of understanding the floor plan and what's on the floor plan, what kind of objects are we dealing with on the floor plan. Having that all in there is important for the accuracy of the design because if you were if you forgot that there was an elevator bank there and it showed the signal strength was great coming from this AP all the way to the back of the room, then we've got a problem. You all of a sudden have to go back to the end user and say, hey, you got to add a new AP. And so now we've got two APs there. This is me manually doing the design. I tend to manually place access points. If you want to save time, you could actually have the design software do that for you. So you can go to APs and say auto plan APs. And usually when you're going to do that, I would probably set capacity zones or capacity areas to have what I call requirement areas. So for example, on the left, I'll click on capacity. And what are we going to call this capacity zone? Another word for capacity zone could be a requirement area. This specific area has a different requirement than another area on the floor plan. So let's say we call this the boardroom. Boardroom. And because there's 12 seats in there, I'm going to say, 12 iPhones, 12 MacBooks. Then I go into the floor plan and I will draw that capacity zone there. and watch the AP numbers. The numbers on the bottom of AP change. So there you go. So you saw that these two numbers got added. There's 3 clients here, 21 clients here. And that's because is that what it's calling? 321? Yeah, clients. And so that's the the capacity planning. Now, there are a lot of desks down here, a cubicle area, and I will draw out a different capacity zone for this because I want to be sure I meet that capacity of computers. And so I click here, still says, I think I just drew out another boardroom capacity zone. And so I'll click on this. I'll call this, call it salespeople, sales department. And let's just say there's, I don't know, 60 iPhones, 60 laptops. All right. So now we've got our 2 zones. There's, let me hide the walls because we don't need them right now. I'll click here, uncheck the walls. Now we're dealing with just attenuation objects and zones. So we got our boardroom and we've got our sales department right here. If I can click on this, give it to me. I'm trying to click on the zone. It's just creating dots. Okay, let's stop playing with that. So now we've got an area that we defined that has a lot of clients, but because we only have one AP in the middle of the office, all of those clients are going to connect there. So now we need to add additional APs. So as we add APs to try to get more signal for this area, you can see the capacity numbers start to change and whether or not we're meeting that capacity. As I drop APs on the floor plan, I also want to be sure I don't place them too close because of not being able to determine where a client's going to connect. They'll see multiple access points. If they're too close at such a strong signal strength, they'll just stick to one. And I'll kind of show you what I'm referring to. So as I start dropping APs, the first thing I'll look at is primary coverage. I see that this area has very great coverage. It's green, it's high, it's -65 or better. So as I try to cover this space, I like to make sure the rooms are covered. I also use the walls in the rooms as attenuation for signal that bleeds out into the open. And so I'll usually place APs in the rooms first, but also over the high capacity, high density areas. And we'll also be sure to cover other meeting rooms, the larger ones. So here we've got a coverage plan. Maybe we move this AP up here. Still covers this meeting room, but also covers this. Looks like desks and toilets. I don't know. Desks and a large desk and smaller desks. And so that's what our coverage looks like. I'll maybe add another AP here for the bathrooms, just so that's where the most important work is done. So now we've got more coverage in our space. I have different capacity areas. Looks like we may not be meeting it over on this AP because it's red. If I look at clients, the limits, try to keep about 40 clients on the 5 gigahertz. We're at 46. Not too worried about that. Now we can look at primary coverage. I'll also look at secondary because I want to see what roaming may look like for somebody if they were on a call. What I like about Hamina is I'll take this client view to try to estimate what that roaming is. So if I'm sitting down here in this corner, I'm on my iPhone. Let me hide this. I'm connected to this AP, and then I need to go all the way to another conference room. How does this client experience look like as I walk across the office? Which access point do I join to? So you could see, because I'm using an iPhone and it's characteristics at -67, I'm near another access point, but I'm still joined down to my original access point. You can tell based on the solid blue dotted line, not solid dotted line, but the blue dotted line. And so I'll keep moving up. I'm going to this conference room. You can see I roamed. I roamed pretty quickly there. And now I'm in this room. I've got great coverage. And so the objective for me here is to make sure roaming is a good experience for people as they walk to different parts of the office. They could be on a call, maybe they're using their phone and it's a Wi-Fi call. And that's why I will look at primary and secondary coverage. If it's red, I try to make sure there's a lot more uh, green, but I need to I need to balance that out with how many APs will be deployed. And so, for the sake of redundancy, if an AP went down, we have to explain to the end user about the risks of an AP going down. If one went down, then you have a large area that isn't being covered by Wi Fi. And so, that's what those capacity requirements are important, is to make sure there's not too many clients on an AP. You want to be sure that you can meet, um, if they're all on Zoom, of course, we're going to have a challenge there and you need to rethink how you're going to approach that. And that's why I use a client view. So after we have uh, looked at secondary coverage, I tested client view characteristic, making sure that looks okay. And let's say the client's happy with this many APs, it's one within their budget. I still will look at different heat maps. So we want to make sure that the SNR is good, what kind of data rate we're getting. We can look at uplink and downlink, and also interference. So co-channel interference. What are our APs channel design is looking like right now? And what's nice is as you place APs on Hamina, it will just do the channel plan for you. And so that's great. Now that we have everything finalized, the next thing that I will do is again make sure that we don't have any installation problems. What I didn't mention here was, hey, how high are these APs going to be? It's at 8.2 feet. Let's say we have a 15-foot ceiling, maybe 8.2 feet is a little too low for the end user. Let's say they want to place it at 10 feet. We'd have to go in here and modify all the APs, or you can go and select them all and change the height. And what you could also do is look at this from a 3D perspective. So I'll show you on 3D what that could look like. We'll click 3D. So you can see some APs look pretty low at 8 feet, right? I have 15-foot high ceiling defined by this pillar. And if I place this AP at 15 feet, you'll see that height change, right? So that's at 15 feet. And so we could add a note here saying you got to use all thread to bring that AP down to 10 feet. Or maybe there isn't a good ceiling to place this AP on. And this is why we talk to the end user, building manager, or the architect, and we go, you know what, this is wall, a wall mounted AP. I'll switch back to 2D, but this is going to be mounted on the wall here, and it's going to be facing that way. So I just clicked and drag the arrow, and we can then see the difference in the signal. So if it was on this wall versus this wall, but facing maybe this way, and that way you're going to look at what the signal propagation appears to be on the predictive in order for you to properly place access points. And maybe someone will recommend placing it on a wall, but you could use Hamina and the client view to explain why that isn't such a great choice. So I can go back here and say, maybe the wall L mount is better because we get a better signal propagation than just placing it on the wall. Or this is what it looks like if you just sit it on the table at three feet. So there's different ways you can play with this and show this in the design. So we'll put that back in the middle at 10 feet. It does cover some of the surrounding rooms as well. And now we're ready to take this and deliver the result to the end user, to the client, to the installer. And the first thing is the end user needs to know how many APs they need to purchase and how much, right? And I like to deliver a report. Usually it's in a PDF format. But what I found is there's a lot of people who just don't read the PDF. So I find myself going into a meeting, a virtual meeting, and actually going through the report, talking through it. Or I'll open the design application and start going through the design and telling them why APs are placed where they are. Would there be any challenges where this AP is installed, or did somebody change the floor plan all of a sudden? And so we can create a bill of materials within Hamina. If we just go to the top right, click on the clipboard or notepad, and click on bill of materials, that shows me how many access points we need. Now we also could just create a report. I can click create new report. And what I like about this is it's a very interactive report for the end user. So I'll just call it office design. I'm going to disable 6 gigahertz because we don't have that on this AP. And it will then produce this online report for me. I can choose to hide certain things. So I'm not going to show tertiary coverage. I'm not going to show anything BLE related. And I'm not going to show anything about switching and cabling because I didn't add that into the floor plan. So now I've got a report that shows me bill of materials, any project notes. Maybe we want to say the address of office. You can put that in here, or you can show them where all the notes are on the floor plan and the different zones. So here's the note that you could bring it up in the report. If they click on it, it'll say, "Is this a wall?" And then somebody could type in their response. Then we can dive into the actual heat map. So the access point placement, this is great for the installers. They'll see where the APs will be deployed, what the primary coverage looks like, what the secondary coverage looks like, SNR, and so on. But I will point out to them to use a client view because ultimately we want to design to these clients. And so I'll tell them to take that roaming man and act like an iPhone or whatever their device is to kind of get a really good idea of what roaming and coverage will look like for a specific AP. So you can produce that, share it with them, or download it as a PDF, however you feel. But that's the gist of what I go through when it when I go through a design, right? Going from speaking with the end user, getting that project initiated, asking them for floor plans, making sure they're accurate, making sure they're not hand drawn with a crayon, but made with a CAD file. They've got the walls in there, and then I'll import it, make sure it's scaled, have the walls drawn in, and any attenuation objects, building materials. Create your capacity areas, define how many devices will be in that area, and then design to the requirements for those areas. Sometimes I will get into a situation where the client doesn't have any floor plans, and generally I will tell them that, hey, I could just ballpark tell you where APs go. You're just as good as doing it yourself. I will tell them that none of this is going to be accurate. I'm just going to tell you where you should place APs. I'm not going to create uh, uh, a floor plan for you, although that's possible if you have the right software. But when you come across that situation, you just have to set some expectations up front and tell them what the risks are for doing a design without the right materials. And so you wouldn't go and tell an architect to just start building a building without a blueprint or without a CAD file, without knowing what kind of wall materials you have, what kind of sprinklers you're going to put in, what you're going to put down on the flooring, or are you going to just wing it? And so when I run into those situations, I'll either just decline to not even do the um, the design at all, or I'll wait for them to actually come up with floor plans. And so that's generally how the approach I take it. And once the end user has this report, they do the installation, they'll either engage me to do the configuration as well. And a lot of times it also leads to the on site validation survey. We want to make sure that what we design for is actually there on site. The APs are installed properly, they're in the right places, the configuration is exactly how we wanted it, RRM is working the way we tuned it, etc. So that's my approach, my design process, my thoughts of when someone says, "Hey, I'd like to have you do a predictive design for our office." And then from there, we just we wait for the end users to actually start populating the space and using Wi-Fi, and we optimize if we have to when they step in. But I hope that was interesting for you guys and it maybe answered some questions that you had of your own. Maybe it helped validated what you do when you are doing a predictive design. But if you do have any questions, you can feel free to leave some comments down at the YouTube video. You could hit us up on social media, or you could join us on Slack and talk about it there. If you go to cleardescend.net/Slack, you will get to the sign up page to join our Slack group. But I just want to thank you guys for sticking around to the very end and seeing how I would use design software like Hamina to put something together. And generally, it's a lot more talking to the end user and planning and getting an idea of how they're going to use a space. What does that space look like? And then once I ask all those questions and have them fill out this questionnaire, then this the design process in Hamina is actually a lot easier because I have already planned for this and knew what to expect. But, anyways, thank you guys for listening or watching, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Bye, guys.